In our last video of Unit 2, we're going to be looking at the business cycle and also how we can connect the business cycle to our PPC graph. We're going to end with the practice FRQ, right, that links together almost everything that we talked about within the Unit 2 sort of playlist for macro. Let's get started. So the business cycle. And so when we talk about the business cycle, right, we're really talking about the state of our economy. And so our economy is never going to experience 100% growth all the time. And so our economy is going to go up and down like a roller coaster, right? We're going to go through times of recession. We're going to go through times of economic growth, right? We can have sustained periods of decline of a recession. We can have sustained periods of economic growth. However, right, we're not going to experience economic growth over an infinite amount of time, much like we're not going to have experience recession over an infinite amount of time either. And so our business cycle is just this right here. This is what you need to know. So on our y-axis, we have our real GDP. On our x-axis, we have time. And then we have this black line, right here that cuts through our red line. That is our full employment, right? So our full employment is this black line right here. And then this red curvy line represents our real GDP. And so if you notice, right, within our business cycle graph, the highest points of each one is known as a peak, right? It's the highest point along that curve. So you can have multiple peaks in a business cycle graph. Same thing is true. The lowest point, and yet again, we can have multiple points of this, is called the trough. It's the lowest point, right? The minimum point of our curve here. And yet again, we can have multiple points of trough in a business cycle. We have multiple peaks in a business cycle as well. If we're going through, right, a decline from a peak to a trough, we're experiencing a recession. If we're going from a trough to a peak, we are experiencing recovery or expansion within our real GDP. And so this graph by itself isn't necessarily that difficult to understand, but one of the good things with macro is that all the graphs that we're going to talk about are interconnected in one way, shape, or form. And so right now, we only really have two graphs that we talked about, the PPC and also our business cycle graph. And so our economy can only exist in one of three places, right? We can have this red highlighted, so point A, so right here and right here, right? And so plus 6% unemployment is pretty bad, especially let's say we're looking at the United States. So if we have over 6% unemployment, we're being inefficient with our resources, so we are within the curve in our PPC, and we are at the trough point of our business cycle. If we're at 4 to 6% unemployment, right, that is within our natural rate of unemployment. And so we are going to be on the PPC because that is the efficient use of all of our resources. And then we are going to be where our full employment, our black full employment curve intersects with our real GDP curve. So that is our natural rate. That's potential GDP. And then last but not least is this green, which is super low unemployment. So less than 4%, right? 3% or less, which leads to inflation, right? So we are at max capacity or close to, we are beyond this, we are beyond our PPC here. And so here, right, we are at the peak of our business cycle. And so our economy can only exist at one of these 3 points, right? Either A, B, or C. And then we can also place these same exact points on our PPC graph as well. Right? And so that's about it in terms of new information, right? The rest of this video is going to go over a practice FRQ, right? So we're going to take everything that we learned within Unit 2 of macro, right? And we're going to apply it to this singular FRQ here. So yet again, right, just the bare basics. The following statistics are from the country of Paddyland in 2016. Dollar values are measured in 2016 dollars. So there are 4 parts of this. We're going to do part A, part B, part C, part D on individual slides, right? And so what I want you guys to do right now is pause the video and get answers and figure out what the nominal GDP, what the real GDP, and what the real GDP per capita is for Paddyland in 2016. All right, so pause the video, and then when you get your answers, unpause it, and we'll go over it together. All right, so to calculate nominal GDP, remember, nominal GDP is just consumer spending plus investment spending plus government spending plus net exports, right? That's how we calculate our GDP. So what we are going to do, right, is we're going to look at consumption, which is consumer spending, right? Investment, which is investment spending. Government spending, which is government spending, right? So right now, right, we have 90 plus 65 plus $50. Now we have to get to our net exports. And remember, net exports is just exports, right, minus imports. So plus 25 minus $50. So if we do 90 plus 65 plus 50 plus negative 25, right, that should get us to $180. So our nominal GDP is $180 here. So part 2, what is our real GDP then, right? So we know our GDP deflator is 90. We know that our nominal GDP is 180. So we're going to have to use our GDP deflator equation. Well, we can say, right, that our nominal, this is part 2, right, that our nominal GDP is going to equal, right, our deflator times our real GDP divided by 100. Right? And so now, right, we can just sort of input our numbers here. Our nominal GDP, we know, is $180. We know that our deflator is 90. We know that our deflator is 90 because it tells us at the very bottom of our screen here, times our real GDP divided by 100, right? And so here, right, we just multiply by 100 on both sides, so we get to, right, we get to 18,000 equals 90 times our real GDP, and we just divide by 90, right? So real GDP should equal, right, $200, right? So our real GDP is $200 there. The last part, right, our real GDP per capita. Remember, our real GDP per capita is just our real GDP, right, divided by the population, right? So real GDP divided by population. Well, we know what our real GDP is, right? Our real GDP, we figured out in part 2, is $200. We also know what our population is because it tells us right here, our population is 50. So our real GDP per capita is $4. Right? So if we're looking at it all again, A1, our nominal GDP, is going to be $180. Our real GDP right, is going to be $200, and our real GDP per capita is going to be $4. All right, so now let's move on to part B. So pause the video real quick, figure out the answer to part B, and when you do, come back to the video and we'll go over the correct answer together. All right, so part B says Debbie is a citizen of the country Wayland, which is not Paddyland, and owns a computer software firm in Paddyland. Is the output produced by Debbie's computer software included in Paddyland's nominal GDP? Well, remember, our characteristics, our requirements to be included in Paddyland's GDP is that it has to be produced within Paddyland's borders, right, within a given year. And so here, the correct answer to this question is, does Debbie's computer software, even though she's a citizen of Wayland but owns a computer software in Paddyland, is her computer software firm included in Paddyland's nominal GDP? The answer is yes, right? And remember, it says to explain, so we have to add the connecting word because, right? Because she's producing her computer software within Paddyland, right? So even though Debbie is a citizen Wayland because her firm is in Pattyland, within Pattyland's borders, right? Everything that her computer company produces is going to count towards Pattyland's GDP. All right, so let's move on to part C. So part C, pause the video real quick, figure out the correct answer, and then unpause it, and we'll go over it together. All right, so it says the GDP deflator for Pattyland in 2015 was 110, right? But we know where GDP deflator in 2016 was 90. So is Pattyland experiencing inflation, deflation, or is there not enough information to determine her economic condition? Well, here, if we know in 2015 her deflator was 110, and in 2016 her deflator was 90, right? That actually decreased from her deflator decreased from 2015 to 2016 from 110 to 190. So we are going to say Pattyland is experiencing deflation. And remember, it says to explain, so deflation because, right? I'm not going to actually write it out for sake of time. So the explanation, right? So Pattyland is experiencing deflation because the GDP deflator in 2016 is less than the GDP deflator in 2015. Or in other words, the GDP deflator fell from 110 to 90 between 2015 and 2016, which indicates falling prices, which is our definition of deflation. All right, so our last part of this FRQ is part D, right? So pause the video, figure out the correct answer again, and then when you have an answer, unpause it, and then we'll go over it together. All right, so calculate the unemployment rate in Pattyland. So remember, right, our unemployment rate is just going to be, right, the number of unemployed over, right, our number in our labor force. Well, luckily for us, right, we have our labor force, which is 25, but, right, we don't have our number of unemployed. We just have our number of employed. Well, to get to our number of unemployed, right, so unemployed, right, is just going to equal, right, our labor force minus the number of people that are employed. So in other words, we just do 25 minus 20 gets to 5, which means in the society, right, there are 5 people that are considered to be unemployed. So if we're going back to our equation, we have 5 people that are unemployed over the number in the labor force, right, which we know is 25, and multiply that by 100 to get to a percentage, right? So 5 over 25 times 100 gets us to 20%. 20%. So our unemployment rate in Pattyland in 2016 was 20%. All right, so that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys learned a lot. And this is officially the end of Unit 2 for macro. And so I'll catch you guys in Unit 3. Peace.